Bore da, croeso cynnes. Good morning and warm welcome to you all. My name is Eleanor Vaughan. I'm Welsh Government Head of Europe Network and Head of Welsh Government's office here in Brussels. Pleased to see so many of you here. It really is a very good, big pleasure. Here for this event with the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, on the future of Wales as a European nation. Most of you will now know that this is the First Minister's last visit, very sadly, to Brussels before he steps down in the middle of March and a new First Minister will be elected. You'll also know, I think, that the First Minister is no stranger to Brussels, having visited here, I think, 6 times in the last 7 years. And I'm really personally very much looking forward to hearing his reflections on the evolution of Wales's relationship with Europe and how that might look in the future. So, as you'll have seen, this is an In Conversation event, and I'm delighted that we are joined by Marid Gwyn-Jones as our moderator today. Marid is really well placed to be steering today's conversation, as she is originally from Wales, has been based here in Brussels for several years, and was previously a commentator for S4C, S4C, the Welsh language channel in Wales, and BBC Cymru on EU elections in Wales. I'll hand over to Marid in a moment, just to mention that although our time is very short today, we will have a little bit of time at the end for a few questions from the audience. So please do have a think about what you might want to ask. And Marid, it's over to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and a very warm welcome to all of you here this morning. It's great to see so many of you turn up. Bore da, brif weinidog, croeso I Brussels. So, as Eleanor said, you're nearing the end of your time in office. There is a leadership contest underway right now. Some of you might have seen the debate between those two contenders just last night. And you are preparing to step down, but yet you've come to Brussels. So I wanted to start there and ask you, why is it important for you to be in the EU capital today? And what message have you brought from Wales to your fellow Europeans here in Brussels?
Well, Marid, diolch yn fawr a diolch yn fawr I chi gyd am ddod bore yma. Thank you all very much indeed for being here this morning. Well, I'm here at this point because this is the week of St David's Day in Wales. St David, the patron saint of Wales, and the 1st of March is always a very big day in our calendar. And historically, going back through the whole period of devolution, the Welsh Government has always held a reception here in Brussels. I came and hosted the reception on behalf of the Welsh Government as far back as 2016. And I've come every year since. And it's a choice you make, because ministers today will be in Dublin, in Mumbai, in London. So, you know, we spread out to spread the word of Wales around St David's Day. But because I have always been very determined, and the Welsh Government is very determined, that Wales remains a European nation, our faces turned out to the world, welcoming people from the rest of the world to Wales, and sustaining some of those key relationships that in many instances go back not just decades, but centuries. So I've always wanted to come here on St David's Day. I always want Wales to be here at the heart of Europe, demonstrating that whatever changed circumstances we find ourselves in, that does not stop our determination to go on having those relationships, forging a common future. And there's something symbolic about being here as part of our great national celebration.
You mentioned there 2016 and that the nature of the relationship between Europe and Wales and the rest of the UK has naturally changed quite drastically during your time in office. So I wanted to ask you about Brexit. You mentioned Wales's ambition as an outward-looking nation, as a nation that welcomes. How much of an obstacle is Brexit to those ambitions today, knowing that, you know, we're out of the single market, out of freedom of movement? How much of an obstacle is that to Wales's international ambitions?
Well, it's an unavoidable obstacle. The Welsh Government's advice to people in Wales was that our future was better secured by membership of the European Union, and nothing that has happened since has changed my mind about that. In fact, I think, you know, as every week goes by, you can see the wisdom of that advice becoming even clearer, because Brexit has been, on the whole, a significant disadvantage to Wales, disadvantaged in our economic relations, disadvantaged in our ability to be part of European-wide schemes like Erasmus or Creative Europe, things that people in Wales invested huge amounts of time and energy and got a huge amount back for that investment. So not being part of the European Union for me and for the Welsh Government is an obstacle to so many of the things we would otherwise have been able to do. But on the other side of the coin, I have felt all the way through the last difficult period just how astonishingly lucky we have been that people we have been friends with over so many years have still been keen to go on being friends into the future. And these are people we've done damage to. You know, these are people we've harmed in the process. So you could easily enough have imagined that there might have been a drawing back on the European side, less of a willingness. But in fact, our key relationships, look, we're a very small place, Wales, we're only 3 million people. We have to be selective in those places where we invest our time and resources. So, you know, we have key relationships with about 5 different European regions. Flanders is one of them. Brittany, our longest standing relationship. The Welsh language and the Breton language are the closest to each other in the Celtic family of languages. The Basque country, where we've always had, again for linguistic reasons, deep ties. You know, our friends in those places have gone on being friends, and I feel have worked hard to sustain the relationship that we are keen to sustain. And in that sense, I think we've been, you know, incredibly fortunate.
Staying with Brexit, the report of the Independent Commission for the Constitutional Future of Wales, I'm sure we'll get back to and discuss in more detail. It mentioned that since Brexit, the number of occasions when the UK government has legislated despite the opposition of the Senedd, of the Parliament in Cardiff, has significantly increased. So I wanted to ask you, since Brexit, do you agree that this kind of disregard for the devolution settlement is on the rise in London? And also, has Brexit changed your vision for the constitutional future of Wales within the UK?
Well, look, these are just factual matters to start with. The system we have is that the UK Parliament should not legislate in areas that have been devolved to Wales or to Scotland unless the Welsh Parliament or the Scottish Parliament give consent to that happening. And for the first 19 years of devolution, that convention was honoured entirely. And that was with Labour governments and with Conservative governments. This is not a party political point, because during the David Cameron government and during the Theresa May government, that convention that Westminster only legislated with the consent of the devolved parliaments was upheld. There's one example in European exit legislation where that didn't happen, but otherwise it was entirely observed. And then you get to 2019, a different government and a very different attitude. So now Westminster routinely legislates where the Welsh Parliament or the Scottish Parliament have said, we don't want you to do that. These are our powers. You know, they've been devolved. We exercise them here, and we don't want you to legislate in our devolved areas. But the government at Westminster pushes ahead in any case. I wouldn't tie that development directly to Brexit. It's about a wider cast of mind in the government that we have had since 2019, and maybe Brexit is part of that, but in the domestic context, it is much more about a UK government. Frankly, you know, Boris Johnson told his own backbenchers that devolution was Tony Blair's greatest mistake. You know, in the way we became very used to, he denied it once it was put to him, but the recording was there for anybody to hear. It's what he said and it's what he meant, and it's how his government largely acted. You know, my view is that in that sense, the government of 2019 until today has been a rogue government. You know, it has acted differently to every other government, including every other Conservative government. And my hope will be that after a general election that's bound to be held this year, we'll return to the way in which business was previously conducted, and we'll have a more respectful set of relationships. And this period will stand out as being an aberration in the longer history of intergovernmental relations in the United Kingdom.
Now, of course, you're an unionist, but you have constantly advocated for more more strength of devolution and a change to devolution and strengthening that devolution settlement and the respect for it that you speak so often about. I wanted to go back to the report of the Independent Commission on the Constitutional Future of Wales. For those of you who haven't read it, it's a very interesting read. And it does set out 3 potential paths for the constitutional future of Wales, those being greater and enhanced devolution, or a Wales in a federal UK, or an independent Wales. So I wonder if you could tell us which one of those do you personally prefer? And also, are you telling Keir Starmer, who could be leading the next government after the general elections, which one of those you prefer and how you want him to help forge that path for Wales within the UK?
Well, maybe I'll very briefly just run past the 3 of them past you. So the report does say that independence is a choice that Wales could make. And I've never myself thought any differently to that. If people in Wales vote to be independent, then of course that pathway must be open to us. I'm not in favour of independence, not because I don't think it's viable, it's because I don't think it's desirable. You know, I'm against barriers, I'm against boundaries. That's why I didn't want to leave the European Union, and I don't want to create a new set of borders inside the United Kingdom. I think, you know, I'm an internationalist in that sense, and I have the same belief as far as relations between the 4 constituent nations of the United Kingdom are concerned. Of the other 2 choices, personally, I'm a federalist. And I'm a federalist for this particular reason, that one of the things that I think is no longer true of the United Kingdom, but where some forces in the United Kingdom go on behaving as though it were true, is this idea of parliamentary sovereignty. The idea that, you know, the Westminster Parliament is in charge of everything, and it ekes out bits of power to other places on its own terms, and if it doesn't like what it sees, it can pull the piece of string back to itself again. I think that model is a model that is already broken. Power exists in Northern Ireland, Scotland, and in Wales. And instead of fashioning a United Kingdom in which all the power is held at the centre and then with different degrees of enthusiasm dispersed to other places, we should recognise that the United Kingdom is a voluntary union of 4 nations where sovereignty exists in the 4 parliaments and where we choose to pool it back together for certain purposes that we agree are better done in common. And that's a much more federalist way of thinking, isn't it? You know, power resides at the nation level, and then we choose to act together. And you know, for me, the things we would choose to do together is quite a long list. Other people might have different lists, but certainly foreign affairs, certainly defence, certainly macroeconomic policy, for me, social security as well. But that's a matter of choice and the pooling back of sovereignty. So it's the opposite model of parliamentary sovereignty, and I think that would give the United Kingdom a much more stable basis for staying together into the future. Where I think the report will land, though, is in the first of the three categories, enhanced devolution, and maybe we have to start there. And the enhanced devolution model means entrenching what we have now so that it cannot be put at risk in the way that it has been in the last 4 or 5 years. The convention that the United Kingdom doesn't legislate in devolved areas is just that. It's a convention. And when the Supreme Court was asked to defend that convention, it said, oh no, there's nothing legal about the convention, it's just a convention. So we need to put these arrangements on a different basis, on a statutory basis, so that we're defended against a future government that doesn't want to play by the rules. And there's a lot in the report about how we do that. So for me, the first thing is to entrench what we've got. I don't think devolution is over in Wales in terms of the scope of devolution, the powers that are exercised, and there's more that we need to do there. And I think in realpolitik, in terms of what you can actually achieve, conversations with incoming Labour government about that strand in the report, I think will be fruitful and will take us somewhere. And those of us who believe in more fundamental reform, the more federalist model, will have to go on arguing our case for it and pointing to some of the ways in which things are done in some other European countries as a model for how you can make that happen successfully.
And just as a follow-up to that, some of those powers that you have called to be devolved, such as criminal justice, is that something you think a future Labour government under Keir Starmer could consider? Do you think that it could be something achievable in the short to medium term?
I hope it's more than consider. It is the policy of my party that criminal justice should be devolved to Wales, as it already is, to Scotland, to Northern Ireland and to England. There is no argument. There is no argument of principle as to why this should not be completed by devolution to Wales. We've had 3 reports on this in very recent times, all of which endorse the devolution of criminal justice. The first was a report headed by a former Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales. The second was a report headed by a former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And the third was chaired by a former Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, these are not people who live on the wilder shores of constitutional reform, are they? So the fact that all of them agree that this is the right thing to do should mean that an incoming Labour government does what we've agreed, and that is that it will make a start on this journey. I'm not a believer in the big bang devolution of criminal justice. It would be too big. It would be too big to swallow in one go. The Welsh Government wouldn't have a capacity to do it. So I think of it more as a 10-year project. You begin with those aspects of criminal justice that are already closest to what we do now, and then when you digested that and made a success of that, you move on to the next piece in that jigsaw. And over 10 years, you absorb it all. The job of the next Labour government, we have pushed this train up the hill for many years. We need the train to go over the top of the hill and start coming down the other side. And I've always believed myself, once it starts to come down, the momentum of change will take us to the destination.
We've spoken about Brexit. One of the other, let's say, crises that kind of was very salient during your time in office was the COVID pandemic. And during that time, many people said that we saw devolution in action. Wales was able to take its own decisions on those measures, and it really brought devolution under the spotlight. And I would say, and maybe some of my fellow Welsh people here would say, that it showed confidence as a nation. That confidence is something I think I would personally say and under your leadership we've seen within our borders, but I wanted to ask you about Wales's confidence as an outward-looking nation. You've also said in the past about this Welsh sense of hesitation. Do you think we still need to overcome that to really make the most of our potential beyond Offa's Dyke, let's say?
Well, I sometimes quote one of my predecessors, Robbie, Morgan, who was the First Minister of Wales in the first 10 years of devolution, and I used to work in his office, and that was the most fantastic education. Of course, he worked for the Commission. He was the Commission's officer in Wales. He spoke French, he spoke German. He was a true European. And when I couldn't stop him, because I would try to stop him if I could, he would describe people in Wales as being pathologically modest. Now, on the one hand, he meant it very positively, because we are inherently not a sort of chest-beating boosterism sort of population, are we? You know, when I think of the contrast between, say, a Boris Johnson figure and somebody like Robbie Morgan, you just see it there so very clearly. So he meant modesty in a very positive way, but that can turn into a feeling of not being fit to do the things that we ought to be fit to do. That's the pathological part of it, isn't it? So I think we're well down that journey. I think those very hesitant days of early devolution are well behind us. I don't think there are people in Wales today who simply would run the argument, we're not capable of doing these things for ourselves. We have a quarter of a century of demonstrating that we are entirely capable of doing these things for ourselves. And I want our young people particularly to grow up confident in their own identity, proud to be people who belong to the part of the world that they belong to, knowing what it means to be Welsh, but to have that identity not in a sense of then using it to exclude other people, not to put up barriers and to reject others because they're not like yourself, but to use that positive sense of identity as a platform in which you do look outwards, and you're confident to do that because you're confident of your own place in the world, so you don't have anything to fear in engaging with other people who may have a different identity and are confident in that as well. And that's the sort of citizen that I hope we will see growing up in Wales. We have a new national curriculum, the first one for many, many years. That's the sort of citizen that we hope our education system and our culture as well will turn out in the future.
You mentioned young people, and you also mentioned earlier those obstacles of Brexit, one of them being the exclusion from the Erasmus programme, which came as quite a blow to many people initially, especially given that a Welshman is known for being the founding father of that programme. Roy Jenkins, when he was here in Brussels, is known for kind of crafting that programme that has given Welsh youth and British youth so many excellent opportunities to go abroad, to come into Europe and to study and so on. There is a replacement programme called TAIF. It's different to the England's touring programme. How is that going? Are you confident it's replacing those opportunities for Welsh youth that Erasmus was initially giving?
Well, the day after the referendum in 2016, I met a group of young people down at our Senedd. They had gathered there spontaneously. They hadn't, this was nothing organised. They just arrived on the steps of the Senedd because they were so angry at what had happened. And they absolutely felt that their futures had been altered for the worst by people who wouldn't be round to see the damage that had been done. And they put a very serious proposition to me in their terms. We had just moved legislation through the Senedd to give 16 and 17-year-olds the vote in Welsh elections, and their proposition was that nobody over the age of 80 should be allowed to vote in elections in the future. And, you know, they put forward that very seriously as a proposition because, as they said, those people wouldn't be there to see the consequences of the choices they were making, but they, the young people, would be. And one of the things that they were very, very upset about was the fact that it looked as though the United Kingdom would not be part of Erasmus in the future. By the way, that was not inevitable. My Scottish counterpart at the time, Nicola Sturgeon, used to say that the failure of the UK government to include continued membership of Erasmus as part of the TCA was an act of cultural vandalism. And she was right, because it was there to be negotiated. Many non-European nations are part of Erasmus, and there was no reason at all why young people in Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom should have been denied that in the future. Well, in Welsh terms, we have mobilised a significant amount of money to support our own scheme. It will pay for 15,000 young people from Wales to visit, to work, to study, to volunteer in other parts of the world, primarily but not exclusively in Europe. But it will also pay, and this is what the UK government scheme doesn't do at all, it will pay for 10,000 young people from the rest of the world to come to Wales and to do the same thing. And the scheme is going very well. We've had higher participation in the first 2 years than the original plan. You know, we expect it would build up over a 5-year period. It's got off to a stronger start. I am really pleased that while it has a very strong representation from students in higher education, we also have lots of young people who will never go to a university, who are part of youth exchanges and other forms of exchange with young people elsewhere in the world. I would much rather that that money was being used to pay for our membership of Erasmus+. So just to be clear, you know, we are very proud of the Tithe programme. We think it's a powerful symbol of our determination that our young people can be those outward-looking, confident citizens of the future. But if we had a choice, we would much rather that we were part of an established scheme that does so much good, was hugely used in Wales. And there are, as you say, through Roy Jenkins, through Howell Kelly-Jones, through other people from Wales who are here in Brussels, we've always had a powerful stake in the shaping of that scheme as well.
Thank you. Another policy that the Welsh Government is famed for, let's say, is this WellBeing of Future Generations Act. So the Welsh Government is the first to enshrine in law the idea that the next generation, or the unborn generation, let's say, should have a say in policy making. Don't worry about it. Yes, yes. There we go. Exactly. So the idea that the unborn generation, the next generation, should have a say in policy making, that all policy should be seen through the lens of the next generation, those that are not yet here with us. So how is that received when you travel to Brussels? Are other EU countries, European nations taking inspiration from that act, do you think?
Well, there's been a huge amount of international interest in the WellBeing of Future Generations Act. We've had several events at the United Nations in New York about it, and whenever I'm in Europe with our key partner regions, we always talk about the Act and how it came about and what it aims to do. The Act does two things, really. It does bite on individual decisions, but it also has a much broader and, in the end, I think, more significant impact in changing the culture of decision-making. So any decision that comes across the desk of a Welsh minister, you are obliged by the WellBeing of Future Generations Act to ask yourself two questions. You've got to ask your question, what will be the impact of this measure in the here and now? How will it change the lives of people who are in Wales today? But you've got to ask yourself the question as well, what will be the impact of this decision, not on people who are here now, but on people who will be here in 20 and 40 and further years' time. And you're obliged to see the decision through that lens. And that does change the nature of decision making. So, as I say, you can see the impact of the Act at individual decision level, but far more significant is the way in which it makes the whole machine, not just ministers, but civil servants and everybody who provides advice to ministers, it just changes the cultural perspective of decision making to make sure that you are taking that long-term look at the impact of your decisions as well as their short and immediate impact. And in that sense, I think the Act is a genuinely radical piece of legislation, and I hope that it has gradually, because cultural change doesn't happen overnight, it has gradually moved us in the direction of making sure that as a government we are not prepared in the way that governments in so many places and for so many years have been, which is to sacrifice the interests of people who will come after us in order to satisfy the needs of people in the here and now.
That act is intrinsically linked to climate change, I would say. But I believe it's true that the Welsh exports continue to be the leading kind of in terms of value of Welsh export. Petroleum products continue to kind of lead that table. How does that tally with the Act, you would say? And also, is this something that your successor, who will be chosen in just over 2 weeks, is going to be continuing to kind of take your legacy on that?
To be honest, I think it's a slightly misleading statistic because it's goods in and goods out. It's just the fact that ports in Wales tend to receive those products and then they leave Wales. We don't do anything with them. We're just a sort of resting point, really. So I don't think that it certainly doesn't tell you anything very significant about our ambitions in the climate change space. And you are absolutely right that the WellBeing of Future Generations Act has its impact most of all in the way in which we approach the most existential threat that all of us face, the way in which this very fragile planet, and those of us who are lucky enough to live in some very beautiful parts of the planet, if we're not careful, we will leave it to those who come after us in a state that we will be ashamed of, thinking of what we did during the time that we had responsibility. So here's my own view of it. If you are involved in politics, you fight elections, and if you are fortunate enough to win an election, you have accumulated political capital as a result. So, I fought an election to become the First Minister. That gives you political capital. And then my party won the last Senate elections in 2021. And that gives you another stock of political capital in the bank. What is the point of political capital? Well, for some people, the point of it is to hoard it, to hang on to it, to stay with what you've gained. My view has always been you work hard to obtain political capital in order to spend it. That's the point of it, is to use it to do things that you can do during the brief time that you're going to be in the job where you're able to do that. And the first biggest decision that I had to make myself on becoming First Minister, not all of you will know this, there was a plan to build a new motorway linking the southeast of Wales out into England. It was to be a 6-lane motorway, and it was to go across some of the most ancient landscape that we had in Wales. It would have destroyed monuments that have been there for over 2,000 years, ancient woodland and so on, and there was a very powerful lobby in favour of it. It was my decision, because only the First Minister could make the decision, not to go ahead with the road. And that used up an awful lot of political capital, because you were quite certainly doing something that was against the most powerful voices in the land. You know, any business organisation, almost all opposition parties, everybody was in favour of this relief road. And using the lens of the WellBeing of Future Generations Act, I couldn't see how this road was going to be in the long-term interests of Wales. So, you know, I have tried to approach the job that I have done in that way, that the point of having the opportunity and having the political capital is to spend it by making the most difficult decisions. There's no point in using it to make easy decisions. Anybody can make those. What you ought to do while you have the chance is to face the challenging decisions. And climate change is the most challenging decision of all, because it will require every one of us to live our lives differently in the future. So some of you will know we've had quite a big challenge to our policy of reducing speed limits in Wales from used to be 30 miles an hour, now they'll be 20 miles an hour in residential areas. And what you realise is that, you know, in the collective effort to tackle climate change, when it becomes you, and you have to change the way you are doing things, then the act of persuasion and the act of bringing people along in that journey is going to be a more challenging one. And some of the things that we've done already in wind power and things like that, which will absolutely help Wales to create a renewable energy future for Wales, but doesn't dig directly into the lives of people. We're all going to have to travel differently, we're all going to have to eat differently, we're all going to have to heat our homes differently, and that will bring climate change out of the landscape and into your own front room. That's where, you know, governments of the future will need to dig deep on the political capital they have in order to make those difficult but absolutely necessary changes happen.
I will shortly come to the room, so do prepare your questions, because we'd like to hear your questions to the First Minister as well. But I wanted to pick up on that. You say we must live our lives differently, and I think this is very interesting considering the quite violent protest that we saw earlier this week here in Brussels, where the farmers were on the street saying, no, we want to continue to live a life as we were, to make a living as we've always done. And I would say that this is maybe challenging some of the political parties in Europe. So first, are you scared that there's going to be kind of the brakes are going to be put down on this green transition? Are you seeing tendencies, as we are here in Europe, that there's kind of this political backlash against them? And then secondly, to close, you said that, you know, you have won elections in Wales, you have that political capital, and it's true that Labour in Wales has this dominance that is quite unprecedented. Even in other parts of Europe, we've seen in kind of post-industrial Labour heartlands or socialist heartlands, that vote being lost, sometimes at the expense of the far right. So I also wanted to ask you, what has been, do you think, Labour's secret in Wales? So why is it that you still have maintained support in those heartlands for the Labour vote?
Diolch yn fawr. Well, on the first part of your question, we will have a large demonstration of farmers outside the Senedd today. And that is because change is hard. And people who live in rural Wales and in our farming communities, I think most people do know that a proposition that says we just want to go on doing what we've always done will not sustain them into the future either. We have to work hard with our farming communities to reach a bargain with them. And it is a bargain, isn't it? Because the taxpayer in Wales invests hundreds of millions of pounds in the rural economy every year. And I think people in Wales will want to go on doing that. But they will want to go on doing it because they will want to see a return on that investment in which sustainable food production is the top of the list. But there's more than that. There are all the other things that farmers do that the public is prepared to invest in. And that is in making sure that our rivers are clean, that the air that we breathe is protected, that the landscape continues to be cared for, and so on. So we're moving to this new bargain, and that means change, and change is a challenging process. And the job of government is to be a bridge to that future with people, to try to find a way in which you can continue to have conversations with people, even when change is challenging, to bring that change about. And, that is a conversation that is not the most straightforward one in Wales, as it hasn't been in Europe, but it is an unavoidable conversation. The future will be different to the past in one way or another. And for farming in Wales, as for farming in Europe, the single greatest challenge is climate change. Farmers in Wales now deal with drought in the summer and flooding in the winter. They deal with severe weather events in the way that they didn't have to only a decade or two ago. So we have to act together in order to be able to protect that future and to make a successful future for sustainable farming in Wales. Well, you were right about Labour. We celebrated 100 years of Labour winning every election in Wales in 2022. So we first won the majority of seats in 1922 in a general election, and we've never not done that since. And that is a unique record in a pure democracy. What I always say to my colleagues is we win elections because we earn every vote that we have. We never take a vote for granted. We never think that because someone lives in an area that's always been a Labour stronghold or always come from a family where other family members before them voted for the Labour Party, that we simply assume that that will go on happening in the future. Every election is a chance to refashion and reaffirm that relationship. And our job is never to assume that people will support us, always to be asking for people's support, always putting a proposition to them that they would be likely to support. And I think one of the things that we have succeeded in doing, and it is a tribute to my predecessors, Rhodri Morgan and Cadwyn Jones, that what we've succeeded in doing in Wales is marrying together the politics of class and the politics of identity. So, here's an interesting little sidelight onto the United Kingdom, that when the British Attitude Survey does its annual survey of attitudes in Wales, more people in England tell you they are middle class than there are middle class people in England. And in Wales, more people tell you that they are working class than there are working class people in Wales. So, a sense of class identity is still an important part of Welsh identity. But I think what we managed as a party is to marry that long-term class-based support that Labour has won and which has eroded elsewhere, with a powerful sense of being Welsh Labour. We are the Welsh Labour Party. We have distinctively Welsh policies. Sometimes those are policies that aren't shared by other Labour parties inside the United Kingdom. But the fact that we have both an identity and, those long-rooted loyalties, that we manage to keep those things together, one on top of the other, is a reason why we've been able to sustain the success we have, together with that sense, as I say, of never ever taking anybody's support for granted.
Thank you very much. We'll come to your questions in the room. If you could raise your hand and say your name, your organisation and your question for the First Minister. I think we can start here. There's a microphone for you.
Thank you for the introductory remarks. My name is Maurizio. I represent the British Youth Council. And one of our big campaigns at the moment is Erasmus. It's Rejoining Erasmus. And I guess my question is, looking to the future, looking at the notion of political capital, what do you think is the likelihood of a potential future Labour government pushing to rejoin the Erasmus scheme? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I was with the Welsh Youth Parliament yesterday. The term of its current members is coming to an end. We're to have elections for the next Parliament, and members of our Youth Parliament are part of the British Youth Council and European Youth Parliaments as well. I'm optimistic about an incoming Labour government wanting to take what I regard as some of the low-hanging fruit, some of the things that could have been put right in the TCA and weren't. And for me, that would certainly include membership of Erasmus Plus, but it would include things like membership of Creative Europe. It would mean membership of some of those public health networks that we're no longer part of, and mean that our public health in the United Kingdom is at risk in a way that it wasn't when we were members of the European Union. There are a range of things which I think are just straightforwardly sensible things for us to be part of, and I hope that an incoming Labour government will move quickly to try to re-establish our ability to be part of those wider networks. I think there are bigger things that an incoming Labour government will want to do in terms of economic relationships, and that will be harder, and there will be understandably a need to reach a new accommodation. But on my optimistic days, I think it goes a bit like this. Labour wins the next election. We do it with the sort of majority that some opinion polls, well actually most opinion polls, tell us we would win if the election were held now. That puts wind in the sails of that Labour government to do some of those things that will be fiercely opposed by the sort of right-wing rump that continues to dominate the press and so on in the United Kingdom. But the force of an election won well would give you a momentum to move on those things before opposition regathers and creates new barriers to doing those things. And Erasmus Plus, I would hope, will be high on the list of things that a Labour government would wish to re-establish.
Next question over here. Thank you.
Hello there. Can you hear me okay? I'm Robbie Manning. I represent the British Agricultural Bureau, so we're representing NFU Cymru here in Wales. So great to see you, Mr. Drakeford. I think this is the third year that we've met, and I think being a British person here in the European bubble, we really appreciate that you do come every year. It shows that you take our future relationship with the EU, very seriously. And I can honestly say, representing Welsh farmers here in Brussels, the role of Welsh Government, the role of Derek Vaughan is really important in terms of re-establishing ourselves. You talked a lot about climate change, and we all agree that this is the number one challenge. But also, we're in a very dangerous world at the moment. We've got the Ukraine, we've got the situation in Gaza. I think there's concern that things will further deteriorate. And given that the title of today's conference is The Future of Wales as a European Nation, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the importance of Wales contributing to global food security, and in terms of the well-being of the future generations policy that you talked about just now, how you see and balance the future of small Welsh family farms going forward, which are the fabric of the Welsh agricultural community. Thank you.
Well, Robin, thank you very much. In our proposed regime of supporting farmers in the future, the Sustainable Farming Scheme, sustainable food production is the top thing that we list as the objective of the scheme. So we do live in a much more dangerous world where energy security, food security, all those things preoccupy governments quite rightly more than they did in the days when the Berlin Wall was coming down. As you've heard, I'm a firm believer that Brexit has done Wales more harm than good. But one of the things that we are now able to do is to fashion our own system of supporting agriculture. And the Common Agricultural Policy rewarded people in Wales simply for sitting on their land. And the more land you had, the more subsidy you got. What our scheme will do will be to put money in the hands of active farmers. And it will move money out of the big landowning. And they're not that, that's not the predominant, we're not barley barons in Wales. But it will move money out of those farms that already have a commercial future of their own, and it will move that money into supporting smaller family farms who farm in parts of Wales where earning a living from what you can do is always going to be more of a struggle if you think that it is just food production, if you're not prepared to reward farmers for all the other things they do. Now, our scheme will reward farmers for all those other things, and it will concentrate the money that we're able to provide on those farms where that is needed the most. And if I'm looking for any Brexit bonuses, I think the fact that we will be able to fashion a scheme of that sort, which we would not have been where we were still in the European Union, then I think that done the right way, and in the way I think we can do it in Wales, I think that will be much to the advantage of the sorts of farmers that you were asking about.
Other questions at the back? If you could take the mic, thank you.
Hi there, thanks very much. My name's Rosie Berard, I'm a journalist. First Minister, what about your own next steps? I think you've said you'll stay in Welsh politics. Would you be interested in a career taking your experience to international diplomacy in any way? I think there are also quite a lot of centre-left parties across Europe that might be looking for some wisdom ahead of big elections coming up. Thanks very much.
Thank you for the question. I sometimes quote Tony Benn at this point by saying, I'm stopping being First Minister in order to spend more time in politics. I myself have always, my political life has always been shaped around my interest in trying to make sure that as many decisions about Wales are made by people in Wales as possible. I was never interested in being a member of Parliament, for example, and I've always seen my political future really as engage in those issues that will be still there for Wales. There'll be many, many of them, in the years ahead. So I don't intend to disappear. I'm a member of the Senate for another couple of years. There are many causes which I think I will have more time to be involved in, slightly freer to speak out about them than you are when you're inevitably constrained by the nature of the job. But I still see myself primarily operating in that Welsh context where I still think there's a great deal more that we need to do.
We'll take the last question, I think. Yes, over here.
Hello, I'm the delegate of the Basque Country to the European Union. First of all, on behalf of the Basque Government, of the Basque Premier, Lehendakari Urkullu, thank you for always, maintaining this mutual collaboration. And one of the common files that we have is the Atlantic macro region. I do hope that you will continue really to support this idea where regions and nations could be fully fledged members of this macro region, and it was just to recall you the importance of the continuously working together with Wales for the Basque Country. Thank you.
Well, look, thank you very much indeed for that. I think our relationship with the Basque Country has been one of the really bright spots during my time as First Minister. We worked together on language issues over the last quarter of a century, and the Basque country has done so remarkably well in fostering the Basque language and embedding it in the way that public services and governments work in the Basque country. And it's been a huge pleasure for me to have been able to play a small part in sustaining and allowing that relationship to blossom. We've talked a bit about climate change. We haven't said very much about renewable energy, but I am very committed to the idea that those of us who face the Atlantic, who have all those natural advantages in shaping the renewable energy world of the future, the wind that blows, the tides that flow, the way we can use water to be part of the renewable energy future that the globe will need, that those of us who share that experience work on that project collaboratively and cooperatively. The last time I was in the Basque Country, I went to see a testbed zone where different forms of renewable energy from the sea were being tested. There were 4 different testbed areas. There were going to be 8 probably by now. One of the 4 was a Welsh company. I saw the Welsh flag flying there, you know, on the sea in the Basque Country. And we can either act competitively and think that this is somewhere where we act in order to maximize our own narrow advantage, or we act collaboratively, sharing resources like ports. You know, Wales has fantastic ports, but none of them are big enough by themselves to do the job that will need to be done in the future. Sharing technology and ideas, and the idea of an Atlantic cooperation area opens up new ways in which we can act collaboratively in that way. And that way, all our peoples will benefit the more. You know, we will all do better if we're able to cooperate and collaborate in that way. I didn't mention when I said about, you know, what would an incoming Labour government do to restore our relationship with Europe? Well, Interreg, inter-territorial cooperation programmes, Wales was a huge beneficiary of that. Now we don't have any of it at all. You know, you would have to pay in, of course. If you want to be a member of a club, you've got to pay the entrance fee. An incoming UK government will have to do that. But if there is a different attitude and a different ambition, then some of those doors that we've been talking about in that Atlantic space will open even more widely, and Wales certainly would want to be there.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for. Diolch, thank you very much, First Minister, for your time. It's been a fascinating conversation, and thank you to all of you as well for joining us. Have a nice day. Thank you.